You ready? It's the Roundtable with me, Robert Bannon.
Well, welcome to the Roundtable, everybody. My name is Robert Bannon. You're listening to us on the Broadway Podcast Network. You're watching us on Broadway World, or you're over on social media, wherever we are. I hope you're following, subscribing, whatever the young people do these days. You know, our next guest, if you're looking for the perfect gift to give someone for this holiday that is a theater nerd like me, who puts posts on Instagram and TikTok that say hashtag theater nerd like me, then our friend Ron Fassler has the perfect book. It's brand new. It came out on the 25th, and it's going to be out, and you are going to get it and give it and read it and find out all the history. How does Ron go from this blank page to writing a whole book? A book, like a real book, people. So Ron is here, and he looks like we could be brothers. Ron and me could be brothers. Ron Fassler, welcome to the show.
Hey, bro.
Bro, what's going on, Ron?
I liked your intro. You talk as fast as I do, but I try and slow myself down when I'm having interviews like this. But I can absolutely rev it up and talk like this and have a fantastic conversation about anything there is to do about the theater.
Why does anyone listen or watch this show when I speak that fast? You know, like the commercial for the man who used to make micro machines when I was younger, and he used to say, micro machines. That's what I'm trying to go for.
Well, I had a lucrative voiceover career, and a lot of the times it was because I was the one that could do those things, you know, not available, the guy that would come in at the end, you know, and read the tag.
Well, that's what I love. Well, Ron, you have the most interesting, like a very fascinating career.
Yes, I've been a jack of many trades, master of none. But no, I honestly think I finally, later in my life, have found my true calling is writing these theater books. I absolutely love taking all the knowledge that I've been gathering since I was about 5 or 6 years old, is when I first delved into my love of theater and theater history. And I've always incorporated it into my work, either as an actor or a playwright, screenwriter, television writer, all those things I've done. But ever since the last 9 years or so, when I moved back to New York, because I had a very burgeoning film and television career in Los Angeles as an actor and a writer, but when I moved back here, I was in the midst of my first book, which was called Up in the Cheap Seats, which is a book about my life going to the theater as a little boy, because I grew up here in New York, and New York City was my playground. I would come in every single weekend and see a Broadway show with my own money, the money I earned on my paper route. And between the ages of 12 and 16, for 4 years, I saw 200 Broadway shows at an average ticket price of about $3. Can you imagine?
You can't even, there's nothing at a Broadway show that's $3.
No, and the education it provided me. I mean, for someone in love with the theater who wanted to act and learning every aspect of it by watching, by osmosis. And then just to make the experiences even more fun for myself, I decided, there was no reason why not, to go backstage and meet all the actors after every show. Because this was a very different age. And there were no people by the stage door, not like today, where everybody has a camera in their pocket, they want a picture, they want a selfie, they want to sell the autographs on eBay. It's become a business. But in the old days, you just knock on the door and say, James Earl Jones, please, or Henry Fonda, please. And I don't know if they've left instructions if a little boy comes or a little girl, send them up. But almost always, I was allowed to just go one flight up, knock on the door, and boom, I'm suddenly in the dressing room of Al Pacino. I mean, I did it every week. I know.
Wait.
It sounds nuts.
For real?
Yeah. And, nowadays, you can't let people roam around a theater. I mean, it's too dangerous. You can't let.
What would you say to them? What would you say?
I just say, I really liked your performance today, and I really liked you on that television show I saw last week, and would you sign my program? And it was, and of course, I've saved all those autographs. I mean, I never throw anything away, which is one of the best things about this book, Cheap Seats, is that when I would go home after all these 200 plays, I would write my reviews, Robert. So that's how I know I saw 200, because I know that on, February 9th, 1970, I saw my 18th play at the St. James Theater. And so like I have these little kind of little portions of the book. I don't know if you can't really see it. It's not coming up light-wise. But this is what I wrote about Follies, the great Stephen Sondheim musical Follies. Now, don't forget, I was 15 years old. I wrote, the book is the weak spot, but it's a pageant more than a show. Stephen Sondheim has written some good numbers, but his dramatic ones are bland and dull. I was cute. I was precocious. I didn't have any taste. No, I mean, it went over my head. Are you kidding? The problems of middle-aged people and follies. I was 15. It didn't.
But that's what makes, but you fall in, but it makes me think of being 10 years old, going to musical theater class in New Jersey, begging my parents to take me to a Broadway show, going to see, my parents took me Broadway shows every month. We went to a Broadway show. My brother slept through the greatest shows of the 90s because he was not into Broadway at all, but my parents cultivated that, and you cultivated that for yourself.
Truly for myself, because my parents never took me. My parents never once said, "Oh, Ronnie loves Broadway, let's take him to a show." I took myself. I took it upon myself. I earned the money with my paper route. I never had an allowance, and I did it all by myself. I barely came up to the box office window when I bought my tickets. I was like, "Can I just have one, please, in the balcony?"
So do you have like a moment was there a favorite? Was there something that really stuck with you? Was there a moment you saw a performance or something that to this day as a kid is like the reason you wanted to be?
Oh, there are things that are so indelible. Even the bombs I saw. Like I saw this play called Park. It had 4 people, and it was 4 people in a park. That was the whole play. And I can remember sections of Park, which I saw on a Saturday afternoon 50 years ago, better than plays I saw 2 weeks ago. I think that's just the way memory works. I'm getting older. But there was something about my attention span and my thrill to be in a theater that was so total and complete. And boy, it served me well. I have just the most incredible memory for things when it comes to those things that I cared about so deeply.
Well, you're a writer and you're an actor and you do voiceover and you do reviews and you do all of the things that you loved growing up and you get to do them now. Do you still go see plays with the veracity? What's the right word, Ron? You're a writer. Thank you. That word.
Well, I always like to say I don't go to plays like this. I go to plays like this. Give it to me. I'm here. I want a transcendent experience. I mean, as a theater critic, and I've been doing this for about 7 years now, you can get pretty jaded. I mean, in the last 12 days or so, I saw 6 brand new Broadway musicals. And, you can tend to just get a little, another Broadway musical. But I try to go in every time with the same kind of, same youthful optimism that I had when I was a kid and give everything the best possible shot. Because I love theater, because there are experiences in the theater that you can have that you cannot have in any other kind of aspect of the arts, because it's live, it's happening, and there's a give and take, and it's all in the moment.
Well, where can we read, before we get to your new book, which is fascinating? Firstly, the other book is available. People can buy Cheap Seats.
Yes. Yeah, Cheap Seats is available on Amazon. My new book is not available on Amazon. There's a reason for that. And it's basically that the first book, I got kind of tired of Amazon taking all my money. They force you to sell a book at its lowest possible cost, because that's what Amazon's all about, right? So after the cost of the book and that, there's nothing left. So I decided for my new book that I was going to publish it myself and eliminate the middleman. And now when you buy my book, just feel happy that you're putting money in my pocket. And, Jeff Bezos has enough money. Let's give Amazon a rest for a while, right?
I'm with it. I'm all about, that's like people talk to me about Spotify and putting out music. I didn't make music for Spotify to make money on my music. Yeah. I don't get any money from that music.
Yeah.
So you can get the book, the new book.
The new book is available from me on my website. If you just go to ronfassler.org, you will find The Show Goes On, Broadway, Hirings, Firings, and Replacements. And it's a 400-page book. It has got a 20-page index. It's got a 20-page season of end notes. I took 890 end notes, so you can find out where I got my sources. If I say Stephen Sondheim saw The Wiz 6 times, don't say he didn't. He did. I've got it in his words where he said, I saw The Wiz 6 times. You know what he said about The Wiz and why he liked The Wiz so much? Sondheim said The Wiz was the one show that you were guaranteed to feel better when you left the theater than when you walked into the theater. And I thought that was for a guy like Sondheim, who was so sophisticated and so bright and erudite and all the things he was still interested in pure entertainment and having a transformative experience in the theater. And The Wiz gave that to him.
I have a lot of thoughts about that whole sentiment that you just gave, Ron. Good, bad, ugly, and all of I should be a critic, because I had so many strong feelings about those sentences you just said.
Well, and The Wiz, too, is in the book because it's got one of the great Broadway replacement stories. You might not know this, but the actor Hinton Battle, who created the role of the Scarecrow, eventually became a three-time Tony Award winner. Pretty rare for an actor to win three Tony Awards. In fact, he was only the second person to ever win three. There have been many more since. So Hinton Battle has a very specific place in theater trivia and history. He also created the role of the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz, in The Wiz, when he was 17 years old. And he was plucked out of the chorus, get this, at intermission, when the actor playing the Scarecrow in Baltimore bolted the show. Intermission came, he went into his dressing room, packed his bags, and left. There was no understudy. This was out of town. They haven't even assigned understudies yet. The stage manager comes backstage, taps Hinton Battle on the shoulder, and says, "Could you go on as the Scarecrow right now?" He goes, "I don't think so. I don't know the lines." They go, "Don't worry, we'll figure it out. It's only Act Two." And Stephanie Mills, who was all of 17 at the same time too, as Dorothy, she comes running in the dressing room and she goes, "It's okay. Every time you need a line, just I'll pull on your straw. I'll throw the line to you." And he said, "Well, I'm brainless anyway. I guess I can do it." He goes out, does the whole second act as the Scarecrow, and the next morning there's a phone call from the producers saying, "Would you like to do it on Broadway?" And that is how Hinton Battle became the Scarecrow of The Wiz. And I tell that story in his own words in the book.
These stories are all in your book, which is available, and we put the graphic, if you're watching us, at ronfassler.org, not .com, .org. And you can get a copy of the book, and you'll get it sent right over to your house, so you don't even have to. And Ron will get a couple bucks from it. To sign it.
It goes right there. From me to you. It's the
Right.
easiest thing in the world. It's been working
Done.
like a charm. Yeah, we posted last Monday, and I've already sold a couple hundred books.
Holy moly, because this is a fascinating story, because I think what happened, Ron, through COVID, especially, at least of people who are not theater aficionados that don't live in the New York area, who are not in the West End or do not go to regional shows or touring productions, they didn't understand, I don't think, until after COVID, at least I feel this way, the importance and the emphasis that's put on replacements, standbys, understudies. We really had very in-depth conversations, because when shows like Wicked had 8 or 9 people out and people were getting pulled in and the casts were changing so quickly, a lot of emphasis was put on the Broadway League and by the producers and the PR teams to talk about replacements and now replacements and all this is a big business. It's a big deal about who's jumping into roles. So what made you write this, and where'd you get this information?
Well, I write a column called Theater Yesterday and Today. That's also at my blog, ronfassler.org. And I've written about 600 columns over the last 7 years or so. And certainly I was writing them during COVID because nobody had anything to do. And at one point, and this was slightly after COVID, like 2022, I wrote a column on Broadway replacements. And it was so rich, I wrote another one. And then I wrote another one. And people kept saying, "Ron, this is a book. This is a whole book." And it was a fantastic idea, because the minute I heard it, I went, "Yes, it is." The show goes on. How does an actor step into another actor's shoes when the pressure is on to do as well as they did, especially if they won the Tony and they were the toast of the town? Who steps in? What happens when the box office plunges? What happens to their ego? How do the other actors deal with them? How do you jump on a moving train? It's already happening, and you just got to jump on and find your place. How little rehearsal time you actually have. What about when an actor is flailing in Boston and you get the call? Shoot up to Boston, see the show, and if all goes well, you're going to go into that show in 2 or 3 days. You're going to learn that part and be on stage in a couple of days and bring it to New York, save the show. These stories, they're practically heroic. And what went on during COVID, once we went back after that year and a half away and we had vaccines, there was still massive testing going on, and people would be sent home the minute they came up positive, regardless if they were feeling perfectly well or not. There was a day during A Beautiful Noise, the show with Neil Diamond's autobiographical musical, 13 of the cast of 20 were out. They were calling in the assistant stage manager who's never acted before in his life. They were having the playwright himself come on stage with a book in his hand. It was that all hands on deck, we're in this together mentality that New Yorkers are famous for. And it provided a bomb to the explosive things that were going on in New York at that time. And I love shining a light on it. I love when Hugh Jackman called this out at the curtain call of The Music Man, when at the third preview, Sutton Foster had come down with COVID, and they sent on Kathy Boyko in her place. And Kathy Boyko had never had a single rehearsal as Marion the librarian. She'd just been watching from the wings, getting it into her system, and pow, went out one afternoon on about 2 hours' notice and played opposite Hugh Jackman in The Music Man. They are the bedrock of Broadway, the understudies. I love telling stories. Yeah.
That's why you've never seen me do theater, because I would be in rehearsal for 2 months and still not know my lines. Never mind one day. That's a true fact, Ron. So when you research this book, how did you get these stories? Because you go back, you're current, you tell some juicy behind the scenes story, like you give us good detail. So how did you find this info?
Well, I've been collecting them up here for a long time. I certainly knew I would have to tell the story of Shirley MacLaine going on in the pajama game. She was a mere understudy. She was 20 years old. And in the true fashion that only happens in the movies, one of the most famous producers in Hollywood was in the audience the night she went on. And he signed her to a 5-year film contract. And 2 weeks later, Alfred Hitchcock went to see the show. She was on again. He was captivated. Who is this charming redhead? So he had to buy the contract from the guy who already had signed her. And Shirley MacLaine was suddenly the star of The Trouble with Harry when it was released in 1955. And she's been a movie star ever since. There's just incredible stories like that. And even though that's been printed before, Shirley's told it herself. I thought it's got to be in the book. Even she has to even have a place on the cover. There's Shirley. But There's Patti LuPone, fired from Sunset Boulevard, because that's an incredible firing story. We know what happened there when Glenn Close took over. Then we've got Ethel Merman going into Hello, Dolly. She was the 7th and final Dolly. This is Whoopi Goldberg when she went in for Nathan Lane. Funny thing happened on the way to the Forum. That was a switch of the sex that worked beautifully. Raul Julia played Dracula after Frank Langella left. Yeah. This is Richard Burton when he went into Equus, the play on Broadway about the doctor trying to cure the boy who blinded 6 horses. Just fantastic stories. And then I was very, very pleased to discover ones that I don't think have ever been told. Because once I started telling people I was working on a book like that, they would say, hey, you've got to talk to so-and-so. Her father has a story about going on during, and then I would get the stories. And I loved going to the library and researching through old newspaper interviews. I loved reading people's papers that were donated to the library, personal correspondences. Winnie Holtzman, who wrote Wicked, is a dear friend. And she always used to say to me when we would be talking about working on writing projects, she'd say, oh, I love research because it's not writing.
Well, that's funny.
And it's true because, once you get down to the writing, that's the hard part.
That is absolutely for sure. And the art of it. Come teach my 6th grade students that anytime, Ron, please.
Yeah, putting a 400-page book together into chapters thematically, making it play. I mean, I was still fooling around moving. Oh, that story belongs in that chapter. No, you know what? It's much better off here. Oh, no, this should end the chapter. No, you have a better arc if you create the story by putting it here, etc. So it's a puzzle. It's a jigsaw puzzle. And I love it. I love puzzles.
It's fascinating to me because you are a quintessential type of idea where you can go to LA, you can be a film and television person, you could write television shows like Murphy Brown, you can write Lifetime movies, you can be in movies, you can write reviews, right, and then put out books, but you be an encyclopedia of knowledge. There's an audience, which is what people don't. Broadway history is not always as well kept in terms of its history as other mediums. Like, it's not like, there's millions of books on films and music and on television, but people that love theater and theater history, there's some great books, but we need a book like this, Ron.
Well, thank you. I mean, the thing that I've been most blessed with, and that also spurred me on during the 2.5 years it took to write it, was every time I'd say, oh, I'm writing a book called The Show Goes On, Broadway Hirings, Firings, and Replacements. And everybody said, what a great idea for a book. And I thought, boy, that's all you need to know when you're working on something really, really long and hard, that there are people waiting for it, that there are people who think that's a great idea, and that it will sell. And what was funny was that when I was growing up as a kid with all of this knowledge in my head, trying to sort of just blab it out to anybody who'd listen, my parents were the ones who heard it more than anybody at the dinner table. I'd be like, you know what I found out today? Did you know that Jack Lemmon went to Harvard? And my mother used to always say, that and 25 cents will get you on the subway.
Well,
now I wish she'd lived long enough to have seen me making money on this book. I think she would be very, very pleased.
But Well, I hear you, and I was a kid like that too. So I get exactly where you are, and I was obsessed with showbiz at a young age. And people that and I understood your comment about seeing six shows. I've moved from New York 4 months ago to Detroit, and it got to the point where Broadway. It sounds so elitist and snobby, but doing what I get to do, I get to see all the shows, and I get to see shows and shows, and it is a job, and you do sometimes forget the magic that is theater, or you get um, I try very hard not to be jaded and cynical when I get to talk to people like you and people that come on my show. And what I forget is that these are human beings who are hired and fired and replaced, who have been through the business of show business and sometimes get eaten up and spit out. And you've humanized some of the most iconic performers of our time.
Yeah, I mean, there's real heartbreak in this book. There are stories of actors who were promised parts, and then all of a sudden, at the last moment, they're asked to step aside because a bigger star wants to do it. It really hurts. Actors who do workshops of shows, and then it's time to finally bring it to Broadway, and they're like, "Well, I've proven them I could play this part over and over and over again," but they don't get to do it when it comes to Broadway. The whole process of casting is a fascinating one. I think people inside the business love these stories, but I think people outside of the business are fascinated by the stories as well.
Absolutely. I don't think it's just for people who love theater or no theater. Like it's anybody who was looking for soap opera and scandalous, because Broadway and showbiz in general is small, and it's these people you're going to see their names come back and around, and how they cast a show and produce a show, and all the drama that ensues. Is there a story in the book that you feel like is the most scandalous? Like, what is the biggest scandal that you tell us about?
I actually left out a story because it took one of the Broadway's most beloved individuals and showed her to be a very petty, mean person. And I didn't have the heart to put it in the book, and it's about Mary Martin, if you can believe that. Peter Pan, our beloved Mary Martin, uh, did something quite terrible to her understudy. She was jealous of her understudy and had her fired.
Oh, well, I guess we'll have to wait for volume two.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to save that for. I'll tell that story at personal appearances and things like that, so I can tell a story that's not in the book. But in terms of the stories in the book that were scandalous, I mean, I do tell some. I mean, I was actually worried. Am I going to get sued if I tell this story about this person? Is this libelous? It's not, because it's the facts. But I think the story that opens the book, because I thought if I could hook them with one story, it's the story that was in the zeitgeist just recently. Everybody knows it, but do you really know the details? And that is the story of Beanie Feldstein being replaced by Leah Michelle in Funny Girl, because that was so played out in the press. That was such a public humiliation for Beanie, and all unnecessary. It was all so badly handled by the producers and by everybody. Um, but they took a show that opened to very mixed reviews, particularly poor ones for the star. They were able to have her leave the show, even though they shoved her out, and bring in Leah Michelle. And do you know that show turned out to have made money?
Yeah,
In spite of all the money they lost or everything that they did wrong, they they sold it out for a solid year with Leah Michelle. They
yeah.
they got the funny girl they should have had in the first place. But boy, what a colossal error! And people were hurt. I'm not trying to pour salt in a wound by telling the story, but it's a hell of a story. And I go back to the beginning and tell all about Funny Girl, just to put it in perspective, how it was developed, how Barbara Streisand came to play it, because it was not developed for Barbara Streisand at all. She just came to get the part, and then of course make it so into her own that nobody touched it for 60 years until it returned to Broadway.
Well, if that doesn't leave you with the cliffhanger of cliffhangers, so you can grab a copy of the book and talk about. I thought of that when I started reading. I'm going to finish the book, and I read through ronfassler.org. Everybody get a copy of the book. It's perfect for Christmas. It's perfect for the holidays. Um, is that story? I think of that. I think of the Great Comet debacle. I think of there's certain things that have happened recently,
Yes.
and then you have the historic stuff that has
Yeah.
gone on. That you get the full gamut with your book.
I mean, don't you want to know about Vivian Vance understudying for Ethel Merman in Anything Goes? Way back in the early 1930s. Did you know that Ethel Mertz could sing like Ethel Merman?
No, this is
I mean,
what I want to know.
we had glimpses of it on I Love Lucy. They'd let her
Yes.
sing. But no, Vivian Vance was a real Broadway musical star, but it only happened for her really in television. But yes, she was Ethel's understudy. And Ethel barely let anybody go on because Ethel was an Iron Woman. And there's a lovely story that one night they were both backstage many years later at a charity benefit. And Vivian sidled up to Ethel and she said, you know, Ethel, this is the first time I'm standing this close next to you, and I haven't wanted you to drop dead.
Well, that if you've read about the behind the scenes of I Love Lucy, that sounds on brand. I think this all sounds on brand. Well, can I ask you? This is my. Well, I want you to get the book, everybody, especially if you're listening to some Broadway World or Broadway Podcast Network. I mean, you are the audience for this book. You need to get this. Is the pick of the season. This is the theater book. This is the theater book to get, and honor some of the unsung heroes of theater, and also honor some that and hear about some of the legends, the good, the bad.
Illustrated too, beautifully illustrated by Jeff York. Look, there's even more on the back.
I love these pictures.
Yeah,
how
we got
cute are they?
that. Well, that's if I can do the fingers. There's Bernadette when she went to night music. Emma Stone in Cabaret. Vanessa Williams for Kiss the Spider Woman. She took over for Cheetah. Remember that? There's Harvey when he went into La Cage aux Folles.
You remember that?
That's Robert Goulet behind him when he went into La Cage. And way up at the top, this is one of my favorite illustrations, if you can see it. That's David Bowie.
Oh, yeah.
The Elephant Man. David Bowie went into the Elephant Man.
Very famous. Especially when we live in a time of stunt casting and celebrity casting and replacements and all of that. This is a book that you got to see about the history of how it all went. Ron, but I'm sure you have strong feelings. I don't know if you could share them about all the shows that are running on Broadway. You review them.
Yes.
And I'm sure you have strong feelings when replacements come out. If it's Hades, like the show Chicago, the stunt casting of it all, or the new shows that come out and put celebrities in the lead of it all to make money. So we can read your blog on your website.
Absolutely. But Chicago has its own chapter in the book, because what the Weislers did, the two producers, Fran and Barry Weisler, to keep that show running for 28 years with the kinds of stunt casting they've done is a kind of genius. It's a kind of producing genius. It really, really is.
I've saw Melanie Griffith. Wow.
The Melanie Griffith part of it. Absolutely. Sandy Duncan, I talked to her. That's the other thing. For this book, I talked to 100 people. And it was just great to get their stories, personally, their stories.
Am I allowed? So get the book, everybody. There you go. I want to read the chapter on Chicago. I've seen it like a million times now because someone else goes in and someone else goes in. And that's the point. That's why they're so brilliant. Do you have something while we're coming to New York this season? Have you seen something? Are you allowed to tell us something that you think we should see?
Yeah. I mean, I just saw in the last 12 days, I saw 6 new Broadway musicals. And I can tell you unequivocally that maybe Happy Ending is the best of the bunch. That's the musical about 2 robots from these Korean writers. That's thoroughly original, beautifully directed by Michael Arden, who won the Tony Award season before last for Parade. It's going to be up for a lot of Tonys in the spring. It was a sleeper hit. It just snuck into town with no real big stars, and it's a hot ticket, and it's a great show. And I also really loved, believe it or not, because it's not my cup of tea, it's not my favorite musical, but I really enjoyed this new Sunset Boulevard. I thought it was crackling good fun. I thought Nicole Scherzinger is amazing in it, and it is a real theater event, a thrilling theater event, and you should see it. It's really fun.
I've been seeing everything here in Detroit, but I've seen everything in New York until this fall, and I can't wait to be home for 2.5 weeks so I can see everything that I've missed because I miss it. And if you're, I'm plugging myself, but if you're watching us on Broadway World or go 2 or 3 weeks back, we did a big old long interview with Helen J. Shin, who's the star of Happy.
Yes, wonderful.
So
Wonderful.
She tells us, talk about getting apart. Her journey to that show is fascinating because they plucked her from watch it because she sent a self-tape in, and before you know it, she's starring in a big old Broadway musical. So Ron, I'm so happy to have met you here, and thank you for sharing this with us all.
Oh, my pleasure. It's the kind of book that I would like to read. That's the kind of book I like to write. I want the details. Sometimes when I'm reading a theater book and it'll say something like, well, James Earl Jones, when he was a young boy, came to New York for the first time, and his father took him to 3 Broadway shows. And I'm like, what were the Broadway shows? How could you leave out that detail? How dare you? So when I was interviewing James Earl Jones for my last book, one of the first questions said, so your dad took you to New York and he goes, yes. I said, you saw 3 Broadway shows. You wouldn't remember them, would you? He goes, of course I would. And he told me all 3 shows and what they meant to it. I was like, Now that's what a true interview does. Those are the kind of questions I want answered. What 3 Broadway shows influenced James Earl Jones when he was that young? So,
well, what were they?
you can put me on the spot.
No.
One of them, I'm pretty sure, was a production of Porgy and Bess. So that kind of knocked him on his pins. Yeah. He said he went to an opera, didn't know what that was about. And he watched dancers and he thought they moved beautifully, but he could never do that. But then when he got stuck in the drama of seeing Porgy and Bess, he was like, okay, that's something I think I can really relate to and be a part of. Yeah.
Well, get both books then. Get the book that Amazon's going to take all the money, and then get the book that Ron will get some money from. And get both books, give them to your theater friends.
Look at me, a walk-in commercial. Up in the cheap seats.
Up in the cheap seats, which is his story about seeing the 200 shows on his newspaper route money. And then go see the show goes on. Go read the show goes on, and then go see a show and support live theater in New York or wherever you live around the world. Go see a show. Support the artists that are putting.
Go see a show wherever you live. I agree, Robert. Best advice.
I'm going to see the tour of Les Mis for the 800th time tomorrow because it feels like it's what you do. You should just go support a show. Go support it. Not that they need my money for.
If Guys and Dolls came to town every 6 months with a new production, I'd be the first.
Be there. See, Ron,
Absolutely.
You're my kind of people. I can't wait to meet you in person. I can't wait to finish reading your book, and I'm going to send you a nice long email about it. And I'm excited. Thank you for being here. Come back, please come back all the time and tell us the things that we're not smart enough to know.
When it comes to stories, I've got a million of them.
All right. Well, then you're just going to have to come back.
Thanks, Robert. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. RonFassler.org, everybody. Get the books. They're available now. It's a perfect gift, like I said. And thank you again for being here.
Take care now.